want to reach out and they want you, the listener, to dig this, to get this, to feel it the way they're feeling it. That's what their intention is. Their intention isn't to say, I'm great, look at me. Yeah. Their intention is to say, wow, feel this. And that's what I like about.
There's a truth about Paul Rodgers that most people have never heard. He's celebrated as one of rock's most powerful voices, the man who fronted Free, Bad Company, and even toured with Queen. But behind all the praise lies a darker story. Rodgers carried deep grudges against certain legendary bands. Not casual disagreements, not minor rivalries. He believed these groups had betrayed rock itself. And now at 75 years old, he's no longer holding back. The truth is more shocking than anyone expected. Let's dive in. Fleetwood Mac AF. All the groups that angered Paul Rodgers, none stung quite like Fleetwood Mac. This wasn't a simple dislike. It was a wound he carried for decades, and it all started with admiration. Back in the late 1960s, Fleetwood Mac, founded by guitarist Peter Green, whom Rodgers deeply respected, were champions of British blues. Rodgers saw them as allies in keeping rock raw and emotional, but by the mid-1970s, his admiration turned into fury. With Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joining the band, Fleetwood Mac shifted away from gritty blues and toward polished California pop. When rumors exploded in 1977, selling more than 40 million copies worldwide, the world praised it as genius. Rodgers saw it as treason. What infuriated him wasn't just the glossy production or chart success, it was how the band acted as if their blues roots never existed. At an industry gala in 1977, witnesses recalled Rodgers literally turning his, back when Fleetwood Mac were introduced, muttering that their music was now cocktail party background noise. By the early 1980s, his hostility was unmistakable. He refused to appear at charity festivals if Fleetwood Mac were on the bill, declaring he'd never share a stage with a group that had, in his view, buried the blues for cash. To Rodgers, they had sold their soul and mocked it by calling the betrayal evolution. Fleetwood Mac never bowed to the criticism. Mick Fleetwood defended their reinvention as a natural step. That indifference only made Rodgers angrier. He wasn't opposed to change. He himself had evolved from Free to Bad Company, but he believed Fleetwood Mac had crossed a moral line. Even decades later, at 75, he still dismisses their biggest hits as polished lies and calls their success the death of British blues on the world stage. Chicago. If Fleetwood Mac represented betrayal, then Chicago represented heartbreak. Rodgers didn't just dislike what they became. He mourned it, as though watching a friend throw away an irreplaceable gift. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Chicago were pioneers. They fused rock and jazz, blending horns and guitars into bold, ambitious music. Songs like 25 or 6 to 4 and Beginnings proved that rock could be intelligent and daring without losing soul. Rodgers admired them greatly, but by the late 1970s, everything changed. Chicago abandoned their horn-driven experimental sound and leaned into soft ballads crafted for adult contemporary radio. Ballads like If You Leave Me Now, 1976, and Hard to Say I'm Sorry, 1982, became massive global hits. Fans adored them, but Rodgers called it artistic suicide. Former Columbia Records producer James William Guercio recalled Rodgers's anguish. They had lightning in a bottle and poured it down the drain. For Rodgers, Chicago had gone from trailblazers to a lounge act. At a 1980 jazz rock festival, when organizers tried to bill him alongside Chicago, he refused. "I won't celebrate the death of musical ambition," he snapped. His bitterness only deepened when Chicago stayed silent. Their commercial success spoke for itself, but to Rodgers, their silence was proof of complacency. Even today, at 75, Rodgers still calls Chicago a funeral for ambition. They remain, in his eyes, the band that broke his heart. Rio Speedwagon Rodgers never forgot the night he first saw Kevin Cronin of Rio Speedwagon leading a crowd through Keep on Loving You. Fans swayed, lighters lit the air, couples kissed in the aisles. To most, it was magical. To Rodgers, it was betrayal. "This isn't rock, it's wallpaper," he muttered to a friend. In the early years, Rodgers had tolerated REO Speedwagon. With Gary Richrath's guitar, albums like Ridin' the Storm Out had a raw, hard rock edge. They weren't groundbreaking, but at least they carried grit. But in the 1980s, REO shifted to glossy ballads, and the success was staggering. High Infidelity, 1980, sold over 10 million copies in the U.S. alone. Hits like Keep on Loving You and Can't Fight. This feeling dominated radio and MTV, embedding themselves into pop culture. Rodgers was furious. It wasn't just the change, it was that their new style became the global face of American rock. "They've turned rock into wedding reception soundtracks," he spat. At a 1983 festival in Europe, Rodgers watched foreign crowds belt out REO ballads as if they defined American rock. He was horrified, calling it cultural defeat. He refused to ever share a bill with them, dismissing their work as pandering. Decades later, he still warns young artists, "Don't end up another REO." To him, they are the symbol of rock turning into background music. Asia on paper, Asia should have been unstoppable. With Steve Howe, yes, John Wetton, King Crimson, Carl Palmer, ELP, and Jeff Downs, yes, Buggles, it was a dream lineup. Rodgers respected each of them as innovators, but when Asia's debut in 1982 became a multi-million seller, Rodgers was disgusted. To him, their music was watered down, built for mass appeal rather than inspiration. He once compared it to Picasso painting house numbers. At a 1983 industry event, when asked about Asia's chart-topping success, Rodgers quipped, "If wisdom leads to compromise, maybe we're better off staying naive and hungry." What angered him most was the ripple effect. Asia's polished formula encouraged other supergroups to do the same, spreading what Rodgers saw as a virus of mediocrity. Even today, he calls them proof that genius is no guarantee of greatness. Foreigner, the first time Rodgers heard Lou Graham's voice on American radio, he froze, not in awe but in fury. The band was Foreigner, guitarist Mick Jones's creation. To Rodgers it sounded like pure sellout. A British musician abandoning blues tradition to make slick anthems for American radio. By the late 1970s, Foreigner's Cold as Ice, Hot-Blooded, and Feels Like the First Time were dominating U.S. charts. By 1981, Urgent and Waiting for a Girl Like You were everywhere. Fans loved it. Rodgers called it cultural treason. At a London industry event in 1981, witnesses recalled Rodgers refusing to greet Foreigner's team, saying, "I won't shake hands with people who sold their musical passport for a bank account." Foreigner didn't hide their intentions. Mick Jones openly admitted he wanted U.S. radio domination. Rodgers believed this poisoned younger British bands into chasing the same formula. "They didn't just change themselves," he once said, "they poisoned the well." Even at 75, Rodgers still names Foreigner as one of the unforgivable bands, seeing them as the moment British rock became American business.